Grant Wilder stood still in the thick alien jungle. The air was warm, heavy with moisture, and every breath tasted like metal. The trees were tall and twisted, their bark glowing faintly with green veins. Strange calls echoed in the distance. Birds, maybe, or something else. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his uniform. His visor blinked with a red message. Connection lost. No signal. His comms had gone down an hour ago. His squad had scattered during the ambush, and now he was alone. Alone on a planet where everything wanted to eat you, or worse. Grant didn't panic. He had been trained for this. Earth's survival school had put him through worse. He had survived desert storms, freezing mountains, and wild beasts. But here, this place was different. The jungle felt alive. It watched him. He moved quietly, careful not to step on fallen branches. The leaves above formed a thick ceiling, letting in only dim blue light from the planet's twin moons. His boots sank slightly into the soft moss covering the forest floor. Something wasn't right. He stopped again. He didn't hear anything, but he could feel it. A strange pressure on his back, like unseen eyes staring right at him. Grant crouched slowly, letting his hand brush against the dirt. It was cold, wet, and there were tracks. Large, soft footprints, shaped like claws, pressed deep into the ground. And fresh. He wasn't alone. But it wasn't just a wild beast. The prints were too even, too careful. Someone was following him. Grant's eyes narrowed. He rose silently, turned away from the trail, and moved sideways instead, deeper into the trees. He needed higher ground to see better. There was a large vine-covered tree ahead with thick roots. Perfect. He reached it, climbed up halfway, and took a deep breath. Then he waited, still as a statue. Moments passed. Then something moved, a shadow between the trees. Fast, low to the ground, blending into the darkness. Grant didn't move. His hand slowly reached for his combat knife. The shadow crept closer. A shape took form. Humanoid, but not human. She was tall, thin but strong, her body covered in dark armor that reflected no light. Her face was masked, and her eyes glowed faintly gold. She moved like a ghost, silent and smooth, each step careful and light. Her weapon was curved and sharp, something between a blade and a claw. A huntress. She crouched where Grant had been standing minutes ago, studying the ground. Her fingers touched the same footprints he had seen. She looked up, sniffed the air, then tilted her head slightly. She didn't know it yet, but he was watching her now. Grant's heartbeat slowed. He remembered the briefings. This species, the Xalthori, were elite hunters. They believed in proving themselves through one-on-one hunts. They never took prisoners, and they had never lost a target. But he wasn't just a target. He was human. He didn't move. Not yet. He wanted to learn more. The huntress stood up and scanned the forest again. Her golden eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her body stiffened. She felt it too. Someone was now watching her. Grant smiled just a little. She turned her head quickly toward the tree where he hid, but he was gone. He had already moved, crawling higher without a sound, like the old Earth commandos had taught him. The predator had just become the prey. She stepped closer, looking up. Her breathing was slow, calm. She didn't speak. The Xalthari rarely did during a hunt, but Grant could feel her thoughts. She believed she had the upper hand. She thought this was her jungle, her kill. Grant slipped behind the tree trunk and prepared his next move. He didn't want to fight. Not yet. He wanted to understand her. This wasn't a wild animal. She was smart, trained, and careful. But so was he. He pulled out a small reflector disc and dropped it behind her quietly. It landed in the moss with barely a sound. She snapped around, weapon ready. That's when Grant vanished again. She moved fast, scanning the area. Her breathing changed. She had just realized something she didn't expect. This human wasn't afraid. He wasn't running blindly. He was planning something. Her fingers tightened around her weapon. She was impressed, but also cautious now. Grant was already gone, deeper into the forest, heading toward the river he remembered from the map. He had a plan now. If she wanted a hunt, he'd give her one, but not like she was used to. This would be a test of minds, not just strength. And Grant Wilder had already decided he wasn't going to lose. Kathira crouched in silence, staring at the moss where the reflector disc had landed. The tiny object didn't belong in this jungle. It was human tech, low grade, but used for distraction. She had seen it before in training simulations. This one wasn't just prey. He had left it there on purpose. She was no longer hunting an animal. She was facing a thinker. Rising slowly, she scanned the dark woods. Her golden eyes flickered behind the narrow mask. Her mind worked fast, calculating his direction, speed, and intent. She respected strength, but even more than that, she respected cleverness. This human was already different from the others she had hunted. Still, she had the advantage. This was her ground, her chosen terrain, and he was alone. Meanwhile, Grant reached a rocky ridge near the river. The water below was loud, masking sound. That helped. He crouched beside a fallen log and quickly set up 2 more reflector discs, placing them at sharp angles. He had no weapons left, except his knife and 2 signal flares. The alien energy gun he carried had shorted out when he fell into the marsh earlier. No bullets, no backup, just him and his brain. He didn't want to kill her. That wasn't the mission. He only needed to survive long enough for extraction. But this Huntress wasn't going to stop unless he gave her a reason. Grant looked up. The stars were faint, barely visible through the thick canopy above. His visor blinked again. No signal. He sighed. Figures, he muttered. Suddenly, the forest behind him went quiet. No insects, no birds, not even wind. Grant tensed. She was near. Kathira moved without sound. Her feet touched the moss lightly, barely leaving a mark. She followed the broken vines and soft impressions, signs he had passed here not long ago. He was careful, but not perfect. Then she saw them. 2 discs, reflecting light in opposite directions. A trap. She smirked behind her mask. He was trying to confuse her. Clever, but not enough. She turned slowly, then stopped. Something didn't add up. There were too many footprints for one person, but no second heartbeat, no scent, just him. Then she understood. He had doubled back. Grant was behind her. She spun fast, weapon raised, but too late. Grant's voice came calmly from above her. "Looking for me." He was perched on a thick branch just overhead. She swung her blade upward, but he jumped, rolled across the ground, and vanished behind a large boulder. She followed, fast and focused. But when she turned the corner, nothing. He was gone again. Kathira stood still, listening. There was a faint whistle. Then something landed softly at her feet. A flare. She jumped back just as the flare lit up, bright and red, blinding her eyes for a second. When her vision cleared, she saw him standing across the rocks. He didn't run. He just looked at her, calm, focused. "You're good," Grant said, "but you're not the only one who plans ahead." Kathira tilted her head. She admired him now. Still, admiration wasn't enough to stop the hunt. She rushed toward him. Grant took a deep breath and waited until the last second, then leaped backward into the river. The cold water swallowed him. Kathira stopped at the edge. She could see bubbles, but no clear form. The current was strong. She scanned the surface, then jumped into the trees above to follow him from above the river. Grant kicked hard, letting the current carry him downstream. His lungs burned. He counted the seconds, then grabbed onto a thick root sticking out from the riverbank and pulled himself out. Soaked and cold, he crawled up and hid beneath a large tree root. Kathira passed above him seconds later, moving through the trees, fast and focused. She hadn't seen where he exited. He smiled weakly and whispered, "One step ahead." The moment passed, and he moved again. He couldn't rest. She would loop Uru in soon. Kathira stopped further down the river. Her instincts told her something was wrong. The current was strong, but no body floated down. No scent of blood. No signs of a weak swimmer. She realized he hadn't been escaping. He had used the river as cover. She let out a low breath through her mask. This wasn't a simple hunt anymore. This was a game, and the human knew the rules. She didn't feel angry. She felt excited. Finally, a worthy challenge. Back in the forest, Grant found shelter in the roots of a fallen tree. He wiped water from his face and looked at his shaking hands. He knew she was faster, stronger, and better equipped. But he also knew something she didn't. He had studied her species. The Talthari hunted with pride. But they also underestimated anything that wasn't their own. And that was their weakness. He took out his last flare and tucked it inside a small crack in the tree, setting it as a delayed distraction. It wasn't much, but it would buy him time. He had no idea how this would end. But he was no one's prey. The night grew darker, and the forest seemed to close in tighter around Grant. Strange glowing insects flew between the trees, casting soft green and blue lights. The air was quiet now, too quiet. Even the river behind him no longer made a sound. He sat beneath the fallen tree's roots, breathing slowly, thinking. "She's not chasing me anymore," he whispered to himself. "She's watching." Grant knew what that meant. The Huntress had realized she couldn't rush in. She was changing her tactics. Now, the real test was beginning. A game of patience, instinct, and nerves. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out a dry protein bar. It wasn't much, but it would help him stay alert. As he chewed quietly, he remembered what his old survival instructor had once said. The first one to move gives away their mind. Kathira moved silently through the upper trees. She had stopped chasing. She no longer believed the human was prey. He was acting like a hunter, setting traps, using tools, even reading her moves before she made them. That was rare. Her people trained from a young age. The hunt was sacred. It wasn't just a way to survive. It was their culture, their honor. Every kill had to be earned, every hunt perfect. But this human, he had turned the hunt around. She paused high in the branches and studied the ground below. A small patch of dirt was disturbed. She tilted her head, then leaped down and landed softly. She bent close and smiled behind her mask. Footprints. But they didn't go far. They ended near a tree with a thick trunk and twisted roots. A decoy. Kathira stood up and looked around slowly. "He's here," she thought. Close. Above her, a tiny flicker of movement caught her eye. A leaf falling. She looked up sharply. Grant was gone again. He had only stayed long enough for her to see the tracks and follow. Just enough to test her. His trail now led deeper into the jungle, where the trees grew closer together and the air was heavier. Kathira followed, but slower now. She wasn't sure anymore who was leading whom. Grant moved carefully, avoiding dry branches and loose stones. He reached a clearing with a fallen column of stone, remains of an ancient alien structure. The vines had almost swallowed it completely, but parts of it still stood. Perfect place to set a trap. He placed one of his broken flares on a flat stone. It wouldn't light, but it would reflect any light that touched it. Nearby, he set a shiny part of his comm device inside a broken helmet. Then he made marks on the ground, just like the ones she had followed before. He backed away, climbing a nearby tree to wait. Minutes passed. Then, movement. Kathira stepped into the clearing, eyes scanning quickly. She saw the flare, the comm device, the helmet. A hiding spot. A sign of weakness. She moved closer. Snap. A soft sound came from the tree above her. Too late. A net made of vine and wire fell from the tree, wrapping around her arms and legs. It wasn't strong enough to trap her for long, but it was enough to surprise her. She slashed at the net with her blade and broke free, turning toward the tree. Grant dropped down in front of her. He didn't run. They stood face to face for the first time. Hathira didn't move. Neither did Grant. "I know you're not here just to kill me," he said calmly. "You want to test me." She didn't reply, but her blade stayed lowered. "I studied your kind," he continued. "You hunt for honor, not hate." She tilted her head, curious. "I'm not your enemy," he said, "but I won't be your prey either." Hathira slowly removed her mask. Her face was sharp but graceful, with glowing golden eyes and faint blue markings on her skin. She looked at him closely, almost like she was seeing a new creature for the first time. "Why didn't you run?" she asked, her voice soft but strong. "Because I wanted you to see me," Grant answered. "Not as something to hunt, but as someone worth respecting." Hathira stared at him for a long moment. Then she stepped back. "This hunt isn't over," she said, "but it has changed." She turned and vanished into the trees. Grant let out a deep breath. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew the balance had shifted. He was no longer just a target. He had become something else in her eyes. Grant didn't sleep that night. He stayed high in a tree, hidden among thick branches and leaves. His eyes scanned the jungle floor below, but the silence continued. Even the insects were quiet again. A part of him wondered if she had left, but deep down, he knew better. Hathira wasn't finished. She had paused the hunt, not ended it. When morning came, the forest shifted. Light filtered in through the high canopy, painting the ground in soft blue and green. The alien sun was weak but steady. Grant climbed down carefully, keeping his steps quiet. He didn't want to leave tracks. The last few encounters had changed everything. This was no longer about escape. It was something more. He found a small pool of clear water near thick vines. As he knelt to refill his bottle, a voice echoed above him. "You drop this." Grant froze. Something dropped beside him and landed with a soft thud. It was his broken comm device, the same one he had used in the trap earlier. Grant slowly stood and looked up. Hathira stood on a low branch, tall and calm, her golden eyes watching him. "You climbed back into the jungle without leaving a single print," she said. "You hide like one of us." "I had to learn quickly," Grant replied. She jumped down, landing a few feet away. Her weapon was still in hand, but it hung by her side, not raised. Grant didn't reach for his knife. They stared at each other for a long moment, neither one blinking. Hathira tilted her head. "Why didn't you run when I caught your scent again?" "Because I wanted to face you," Grant said. "Not as prey, as equal." A slight smirk touched her lips. "We'll see." And just like that, she lunged forward. Grant had expected it. He ducked and rolled to the side, avoiding the sharp arc of her curved blade. She moved fast, faster than anyone he had ever fought. But he didn't back down. He grabbed a long branch and swung it toward her. She blocked it with her arm guard, then swept her leg out to trip him. He stumbled but caught himself, backing into a tree trunk. She pressed forward, testing him, not trying to kill, but to push him. Grant responded with sharp, calculated moves, using his environment as a shield. He grabbed a loose rock and tossed it at her feet. She jumped back, surprised, and he followed with a quick tackle. They crashed onto the forest floor together. Hathira flipped over and landed on top of him, blade to his throat. But she didn't press it. Grant stared up at her, breathing hard. "That it?" She studied him. "You're stronger than you look, and you're faster than I expected," he replied. She stood and offered him a hand. He took it. That was the moment the storm began. A loud, rumbling sound rolled through the trees. The air grew colder and the sky turned gray. Wind swept through the forest, bending branches and tossing leaves in every direction. "Toxic storm," Hathira said quickly. "We need shelter." Grant nodded. I saw a cave near the cliffs yesterday. They ran side by side, no longer enemies, at least for now. The rain started falling, thick, oily, and foul-smelling. It wasn't water. It was chemical runoff from the planet's strange weather system. They reached the cave just in time. Grant lit a small survival lamp, and the dim yellow light filled the space. The stone walls were dry and safe. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, there was only silence. Kathira sat near the wall, removing her mask. Grant sat across from her, wiping the wet dirt from his arms. He looked at her closely now. Her face had marks, faint blue lines that seemed to glow faintly. Her eyes were alert but calm. "You could have killed me just now," he said. "So could you," she replied. "But we didn't." Kathira nodded slowly. "That means something." For a moment, they said nothing. Then she asked, "Why do humans come to dangerous worlds like this? What are you looking for?" Grant thought for a second. Not always for war, sometimes for knowledge, sometimes survival, sometimes just to prove we can. Kathira looked thoughtful. "You risk your life to face me, but not out of pride." "Why?" "Because if we're going to survive in a galaxy like this," Grant said, "we have to show we're not weak, but not cruel either." She looked down, tracing a finger on the cave floor. "You fight like us, but you think differently. That's what makes us human," he said with a smile. Outside, the storm began to fade. Kathira stood and walked to the entrance. She looked back at him, her expression unreadable. "This hunt isn't over," she said softly. "I know," Grant replied. "But now," she added, "I'm not sure who's really being hunted." The storm had passed by morning, leaving only damp, heavy air and the scent of fresh rain. Grant woke first as usual and sat quietly near the mouth of the cave, watching the sky lighten. The jungle was alive with sounds again. Bird calls, rustling leaves, and the hum of insects. Kathira had already gone outside. She stood near the edge of the cave, her back to him, staring into the distance. Her armor was damp, but she didn't seem bothered by it. Grant stood and approached, careful not to disturb her. "The storm's over," he said softly, but she didn't turn around. She simply nodded. "I know," she said. "I've lived through worse." He walked closer, stopping beside her, but kept his distance. It had been an intense night. They had fought, but now there was a different kind of understanding between them. They weren't enemies anymore. They were two beings who had learned more about each other than any battle could show. "So, what now?" Grant asked. "Are you going to finish what you started?" Kathira turned her head slightly, her golden eyes catching the light of the rising sun. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Maybe I already have," she said. Grant raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" Kathira took a deep breath and stood taller. "You've proven something to me. You're not just some prey to be hunted. You've shown me that humans are different. Your survival is not about running or hiding. It's about adapting. It's about thinking." Grant couldn't help but smile. "We're not all as smart as I seem. Most of us just get lucky." She gave a quiet, almost amused hum. "You've always relied on luck." "Maybe," he said with a small grin. "But I'd say more on survival instincts, and knowing when to push forward and when to hold back." Kathira looked at him closely. "That's where we differ. The Exalthuri never hesitate. When we hunt, we kill. We test ourselves by pushing to the edge and beyond. We don't worry about stopping." Grant thought about that. "I've read about your kind, a culture built on honor and strength. But it sounds like you're looking for something more than just victory." Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger. There was something else there, something deeper. "We value victory," she said, "but only because it proves we are strong enough to survive. It's not about power. It's about proving we are worthy of our place in the world." Grant nodded slowly. He had heard similar things before. Humans, too, often struggled with the concept of worth, especially when they came into contact with other species. He had heard stories of people who thought power and dominance were the only things that mattered. But Kythera was different. "So, what would you call worthy?" Grant asked. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "Strength of mind, strength of heart, strength to survive, no matter the odds." Grant smiled again, but this time it was softer. "That sounds like something I can agree with." For a moment, they just stood there in silence, watching the jungle come back to life around them. The storm had passed, but the weight of the words they had exchanged lingered in the air. Grant knew Kythera was right in many ways. Her people had their own code, their own beliefs, but he also knew that their worlds had collided in a way that neither of them had expected. Finally, Kythera spoke again. "You've earned my respect, human. I don't know if you'll survive today, but you've already proven that you don't give up. And that's more than I can say for many of my own kind." Grant blinked in surprise. "Respect? I thought you were still hunting me." Her gaze softened. "You still are, in a way, but not in the way you think. I hunt you to test myself, to see if you can outsmart me, outrun me, or beat me at my own game. But there's no shame in losing, only in refusing to fight." Grant considered her words carefully. "That's not how we usually think about it. Where I'm from, we believe that what matters most is helping each other, not just outdoing one another." Kythera looked at him with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. "Helping each other? In a hunt?" He nodded. "We don't see it as a battle for survival, more like a test of each person's strengths, what we can learn from each other to make us all better." Kythera tilted her head, clearly thinking. "Interesting. It's not how we've been taught. The Scifi do not work together in the hunt. We win or we lose alone." Grant glanced out into the jungle, watching the foliage sway with the wind. "Maybe that's why we're so different. We don't always have to fight alone. Sometimes the real strength comes from the bond between people, finding ways to fight together." She studied him for a long moment. "I think I understand, but that's not how we are." "Maybe it's time to change that," Grant said with a small shrug. Kythera said nothing for a while, but when she did speak, her voice was quieter, almost thoughtful. "You're a strange human, Grant Wilder," she said, and there was no malice in her words. Only the hint of something else, maybe even respect. "But maybe you're right." She stepped back. "You'll face me again today, but I'll not just hunt you. You're no longer prey." Grant smiled. "Then we'll see who the real hunter is." The jungle was quiet again. The air was thick with humidity, and Grant could hear the faint rustling of leaves above. Kythera stood a few feet away, watching him with unreadable eyes. The respect between them was undeniable, but the hunt was far from over. Grant wiped his brow and checked his gear one more time. He had no choice now but to face her once again. This time, though, it was different. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something more than just his own life. Kythera spoke first, her voice low and steady. "We hunt today, but not just each other." Grant looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Her golden eyes scanned the forest around them, and for a moment he saw the edge of something else in her gaze. "Something else is in these woods," she said. "And it's not just dangerous. It's more than either of us can handle alone." Grant frowned, feeling his pulse quicken. "What do you mean? What's out there?" Kythera didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for a small device strapped to her belt and pressed a button. A holographic map appeared in front of them, flickering in the thick air. Her finger traced a path on the map, pointing to a section deep within the jungle. "The creature I speak of is something that should never have been created," she explained, her voice colder now. "It was engineered, designed by an ancient race, a race that has long since disappeared. They left behind a creation, a monstrous being. It's been roaming these woods for generations, and now it's waking up again." Grant felt a chill run down his spine. Waking up. What kind of creature are we talking about here? It's a predator, Kothira replied simply. A being that hunts everything. It's a machine and an animal, all in one. And it's relentless. It has no need for food, no sense of mercy. It only wants to kill. Grant's stomach tightened. And we have to fight this thing. Kothira nodded. We will have to fight it if we want to leave this place alive. It hunts in silence, but it's faster than anything you've seen. It doesn't miss. Grant was silent for a long moment, processing what Kothira had said. He wasn't sure what kind of creature this was, but he knew one thing. It sounded like nothing he had ever encountered before. He was no stranger to danger, but this was on a whole different level. Then he looked at Kothira, her eyes filled with determination. Despite the danger, despite the fear, she stood tall, unmoving. I've been running this whole time, Grant said, his voice low but steady. But if there's a real enemy out there, then maybe it's time to stop running. Kothira's lips curled into a small smile. I thought you might say that. She led the way, moving silently through the jungle. Grant followed closely behind, keeping his steps light. They moved quickly but cautiously, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of the creature. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the jungle, and the trees around them grew thicker, their trunks larger and more twisted. The feeling of being watched was heavy in the air, as though every plant and every rock in the jungle knew they were coming. Finally, they'd reached a small clearing, and Kothira stopped. She held up her hand, signaling for Grant to do the same. In front of them was a massive, twisted structure, what remained of an ancient temple, overgrown with vines and roots. It was dark and silent, but something about it felt wrong. The jungle around them was still, and Grant could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Kothira motioned for him to follow her as she crept forward, her steps as quiet as a shadow. Grant stayed close, his eyes darting to every corner, every possible hiding place. They reached the entrance of the temple, and Kothira paused, listening intently. Grant was about to ask what she had heard when he saw it, movement in the shadows, just beyond the entrance. The flicker of something large, something fast. He froze. Kothira raised a finger to her lips and nodded toward the temple. It's here, she whispered. Stay close. Grant nodded, his heart racing. He was used to danger, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about facing something far beyond his understanding. They entered the temple cautiously, the walls of the ancient structure looming high above them. The air inside was heavy with dust, the smell of old stone and decay. Kothira moved ahead, her eyes scanning the shadows. Grant stayed close behind, watching every step, every corner. His senses were on high alert, every part of him ready to react at a moment's notice. And then he heard it. A low growl. It was deep, rumbling through the ground, vibrating in the walls. The creature was close. Grant's heart thudded in his chest. He glanced at Kothira, whose eyes were locked on the dark shape ahead. The predator was here. The growl echoed in the temple, a deep, menacing sound that sent a chill down Grant's spine. He could feel the ground vibrating beneath his feet, as if the creature was making its move. He glanced at Kothira. Her eyes narrowed in focus, her body tense but poised. They both knew this wasn't just another hunt. This was survival. Kothira moved first, slipping into the shadows. Her movements were swift, almost ghostly. Grant followed, staying low, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the predator. The ancient stone walls around them seemed to close in, adding to the tension. The growl grew louder, closer. The air became thick with an unsettling stillness. No birds, no insects, just the faint sound of the creature's massive body moving through the temple. Grant's pulse quickened. Where is it? He whispered, barely able to hear his own voice. Get to the pillars. Kothira yelled. It's not invincible. We can trap it. Grant nodded, moving swiftly toward the pillars that lined the temple's central chamber. The creature followed, its steps heavy and thunderous. It was relentless, but Kathira was right. It wasn't invincible. Grant reached one of the pillars, using it for cover. The creature, driven by instinct, charged toward him. He waited until the last moment, then sprang into action. Kathira took the opportunity to strike. With precise movements, she activated a hidden mechanism in her weapon, sending a powerful energy pulse directly at the creature. The blast hit its armor, causing a temporary disruption in its systems. The creature staggered back, growling in pain. Grant seized the moment. He sprinted toward the creature, aiming for a weak point in its armor that he had spotted earlier. He thrust his knife into the gap, pushing with all his strength. The blade cut deep, and the creature howled in fury. With a final powerful strike from Kathira, the creature collapsed to the ground. Defeated, it twitched for a moment, then went still. Grant stepped back, panting heavily. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at Kathira. She stood over the creature, her weapon still raised but her expression calm. "That was too close," Grant said, his voice a little shaky. Kathira nodded. "But we did it. Together." Grant let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah, together." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the battle sinking in. It had been a fight for survival, one they hadn't expected to win. But they had. Against the odds, they had worked together to take down the beast. Kathira turned to him, her golden eyes softening. "You've proven yourself, human," she said. "Not just in battle, but in how you think. You were willing to work with me, even when you had no reason to trust me." Grant looked at her, surprised. "You're saying, you trust me now?" She paused, then nodded. "I didn't understand your kind at first. But now, I see what makes you strong. It's not just about fighting. It's about understanding. About working with others, even when everything tells you to fight alone." Grant felt a strange sense of pride welling up inside him. Kathira, the fierce and deadly huntress, was admitting something he hadn't expected. And it felt good. "I guess I didn't understand you either," Grant said. "I thought the hunt was just about strength. But now, I see it's about more than that. It's about respect and understanding your opponent. It's about the journey, not just the outcome." Kathira looked at him for a moment longer, then smiled. It was a small smile, but it held more than Grant had expected. "Maybe we're not so different after all." He returned her smile, feeling the weight of their shared experience. Maybe not. As they stood there, looking down at the fallen creature, Grant realized that this hunt had changed both of them. They had faced their greatest challenge together, and in doing so, had formed an unexpected bond. Kathira's gaze shifted toward the jungle outside the temple, her expression thoughtful. "The hunt is over," she said, "but our journey is just beginning." Grant nodded. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next."